Hey, welcome back to our Old Testament studies. It's Sunday evening. It's time for Daniel chapter 3. We've met this old pagan king who's the most powerful man in the world, Nebuchadnezzar, over the nation of Babylon, which was the great world power in his day. They've taken the Jewish people captive, POWs down in that country, and he selected the cream of the crop, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to be on his council because he recognized they would add to his brain trust. So he made Daniel kind of prime minister, almost like vice president to him, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're there in the council too. So we get 30 verses in tonight's chapter of a really fast-moving story, and a lot of it is we repeat these instruments several times in it, but I guess God's making a point to us here. Be careful what you worship is the main point, or who you worship, because there's only one worthy of worship. So we get this from the story of Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace in chapter 3. Daniel's not even in it. I'm assuming he's sent away on a mission somewhere because we don't see him, but we see all the rest of the government. He may be he may have been sent by Nebuchadnezzar to talk to some other province or country or something. But here we are, chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, that old pagan king, the king, he made an image of gold, or a big statue of gold, whose height was 80 cubits. And a cubit was about from here to tip that finger to here, roughly 18 inches, what we figure it. So that would make it 90 feet high. And the breadth was 6 cubits, which is very narrow, 9 feet wide. So 9 feet wide by 90 feet high. In my mind, it's an obelisk, sort of like maybe think the Washington Monument sort of thing, but it's pure gold. And he set it up on the plain of Dura. I wonder what happened to it. I reckon that's still in that sand. If we knew exactly where that is, that 90 by 9 solid gold statue may still be buried over there somewhere. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, he sent together the government, if you would. They're going to have a dedication. We still do this kind of stuff, right? So we're going to dedicate a bridge. We're going to dedicate a statue. All the dignitaries are there. So that's what's in verse 2 here. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, he sent together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, all the rulers of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So then the princes, governors, captains, judges, treasurers, and counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces, they were gathered together to the dedication of the image that the king had set up. They stood before the image. Now, we still do this. You can pick up the paper this week and find something. We're dedicating something, and all the dignitaries are there, and they're going to stand right in front of it for some kind of photo op, right? So that's just the way things have always been. That Nebuchadnezzar had set up. They're standing in front of it, so all the people can see them. Then a herald cried aloud. So a spokesman on behalf of the king cried aloud. What did he say? There's a new law. He's going to tell the people what the law is at this opportunity here. To you it is commanded. That means it's Nebuchadnezzar's law. O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear this music play, the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, dulcimer, all kinds of music. That's a big orchestra or band, right? So somebody called them the Babylonian beboppers. When you hear them playing, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. That's the new law. Anytime you hear that play, you fall down and worship that image. And you can see it from a long ways off because it's 90 feet tall and it's narrow, and he set it up in the plain out there. And whoso falls not down, now with any law that we make or Babylon made or anybody else, even God's law, it's no good without accountability built into it to give some teeth to the law. And all God's law, believe me, it has accountability built into it. So does this law. The king, the pagan, he says, whosoever falls not down and worships shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. If you don't do what I say, you're breaking the law, and it's the death penalty. We're going to throw you in a furnace. Verse 7, therefore at that time, when all the people heard it's first one set up. Everybody's supposed to do it, right? They just told them the law, you're supposed to do it or you're going to be in trouble. All the photo op people there, the statue's being dedicated. Now they're going to blow up, play all this music with all those instruments, and the people have just been told what to do. There's to fall down and worship. Now, I doubt if any of them were worshiping. Worship is something that comes from the inside. They were just doing what they were commanded to do, right? But the Jews weren't going to do this because they couldn't fall down and pretend to worship or anything else, and God's people can't either. We're going to put God first. So there at that time, when all the people, verse 7, they heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, the languages, they fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. But now, somebody looked around and said, this is our opportunity. We don't like them Jews, especially the ones that the king put in his cabinet ruling over us. So some of the Chaldeans in verse 8, wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near, and they accused the Jews. They're going to be tattletales, right? Then spake they to the king Nebuchadnezzar, said, O king, live forever. If you wanted to live forever, you went in and told the king to live forever, I guess, right? And thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. That's the law, king. You made it, right? And whosoever falls not down and worship, that he should be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Right, king? Is that what you said? We heard you right. Yep. And then they said, well, then there's certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They didn't pay attention to what you said. They serve not your gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, if you notice that in just 3 chapters, he flies off the handle fast, don't he? So Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. They're in trouble. They've been brought in before the king. They've been arrested. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, I think Nebuchadnezzar kind of liked these young Jewish men, right? They've impressed him. He don't want to lose them either, so he's going to say, I'm going to give you a second chance here. If you be ready, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, if you be ready now, fall down and worship the image which I made, and we'll all be well. But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? You can kind of see his arrogance, right? He's like, there ain't no God that can deliver you out of my hands, he said. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, they didn't tell him to live forever. O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer thee in this matter. We're not afraid. We're going to tell you what's going on. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. This is the same thing the apostles ran into the book of Acts, right? If the law of man comes in conflict with the law of God, they said, we've got to obey God, not men. You can't tell us to do that. We can't do that because our God, who's higher than you, King Nebuchadnezzar, told us that we can't bow down to any other images or worship them. And I like the way they answered here. Said, we're not going to do it, King. Said, our God is able to deliver us. But they said, if he chooses not to deliver us, we still ain't going to do it. In other words, they're saying, that's the way we ought to be Christians. Like, okay, I'm ready to stand on the word of God at any cost. It might cost me my life, but I'm going to do what God says if somebody else tells me to do something in conflict with what thus saith the Lord. Then was Nebuchadnezzar, verse 14, he was full of fury. He was really mad. And the form of his visage was changed, or the expression of his face really changed. They could tell he is mad now. It changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded in his rage and fury, heat that furnace 7 times more than it's usually heated. I want it 7 times hotter than normal. I guess they had to really throw the wood to it or coal, whatever they was heating this thing up with. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, cuff them, throw them in that furnace, cast them into the burning fiery furnace. These men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, and other garments. They went in fully clothed. And they were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent or hastily made, the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In other words, they got it so hot that the guards that were trying to throw them in there, they died as they were throwing them in. Verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said to his counselors or his administrators, did we not cast 3? He's sitting there watching for the suffering, the burning, right? And he saw something that knocked his socks off. He said, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? His counselors said unto the king, true, O king. Nebuchadnezzar, verse 25, he answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. And they have no hurt. They don't seem to be hurting. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. I don't know what he saw to recognize the 4th one was more than a mortal, but he recognized that something's going on here. 26, then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace. Close as he'd get, as hot as it was, and he yelled in there, he spake, and he said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God. It's interesting now, he's changed his tune. He says, the Most High God, your servants. So come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they came forth out of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, captains, and king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed or burnt, nor the smell of fire had passed. They came out there, they didn't even smell like smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed, he spoke of beatitude, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and hath sent his angel or his messenger. I think that angel is the angel of the Lord, who is really the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, who's walking in that fire with them. And he delivered his servants that trusted in him. Now here's a verse that you can take this whole story, that's a literal historical story recorded for us here in the Bible, in the Old Testament, a miracle story. I believe it literally happened. But you say, well, how in the world is that possible? With God, anything's possible. God did this. But also, you can really see the prefigurement of the gospel in here, too. We were all bound to the fiery furnace of hell, where we deserve to go as sinners. But we were saved because Jesus went through that fiery furnace on our behalf. And he delivered his servants that trusted in him. So you got to trust in the Lord to find the delivery out of the fire here. And they've changed these servants. They changed the king's word. They disobeyed him. They yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except for their own. Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to make a new law. Therefore I make a decree, verse 29, that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut in pieces, and their houses be made a dunghill. That's a pile of dookie, a dunghill. their houses. Because Nebuchadnezzar says, because there's no other God that can deliver like this after this sort. Now, Nebuchadnezzar ain't got there yet. This is his confession, but you can see this old pagan king is sort of growing as we go through these chapters, but boy, he has to go through a hard time before he finally figures out really who God is. And maybe one of his biggest hindrances was he had to get over who he was to figure out who God was. Because there's no other God that can deliver after this sort. We'll come to that in a few chapters here. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Here's one of those Romans 8:28 things. All things were working together for good to those that love God, those who are the called according to his purpose. I mean, it was a scary thing, even though they trusted in God. Put yourself in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's place. Like, if we don't do the right thing, we're going to get in trouble with God. But if we disobey this king who's making the laws, if we don't do what the government's telling us to do, then we're going to get in real trouble with the government too. What are we going to do? And they got together and they said, well, it's a no-brainer. We know what we're going to do. We're going to take a stand for God's word. We serve a higher God than the king or any other government. So we're going to take a stand for God's word. Well, that might get us killed. Well, so be it. Our God's able to deliver us. But if he don't, we'll be better off anyway. But I'm not going to be a traitor to God. I'm going to do the right thing. It was a bad thing that they were going through, getting cast into the fiery furnace, but God used that to work good for you and I, for the world at the time, and for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They got promoted to a higher position eventually, and on the front side, they would have never seen that coming, would they? That we're going to come out of this not only still with our jobs and our lives, but better off than we was because we took a stand against that king, because we took a stand in so doing for our God. I hope you can be that bold for God too. See you next time.